Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are objectively breaking down former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott's highly debated arguments regarding multiculturalism and national identity. Now, whether you agree with his conclusions or fundamentally oppose them, understanding the mechanics of his argument is absolutely crucial. Why? Because it's a direct mirror to one of the most polarizing debates happening across the Western world right now. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at the multiculturalism thesis, the catalysts for his argument, ideologies versus individuals, integration and core culture, and finally, the future of migration. Let's get right into it. Part 1. The multiculturalism thesis. Tony Abbott literally does not mince words here. His core premise? Multiculturalism has failed, and diversity is absolutely not our strength. He points to rising public disquiet, things like graffiti, firebombings, and what he calls hate marches, as proof that the system is breaking down. For him, these aren't just isolated crimes. They are glaring symptoms of a broader systemic failure. He argues that for years now, a lot of Australians have been carrying around this quiet, persistent worry. The worry that the country is just changing way too fast. And in his view, not necessarily for the better. It's a gradual hardening of public frustration. When the pace of cultural change outstrips a society's ability to actually absorb it, you don't get unity, he suggests, you just get friction. Moving on to part 2, catalysts for the argument. So, what exactly triggered this? Abbott lays out a very rapid, specific timeline to highlight what he calls the rot. He starts with October 8, 2023, when he notes certain Islamist leaders in Australia actually celebrated the October 7th attacks. The very next day, a mob marched on the Opera House. That then escalated into weekly marches in major cities, which he argues ultimately culminated in the devastating Bondi massacre. He really leans into the Bondi massacre as his main, devastating case study. And the details he highlights are pretty stark. We're talking about a father and son duo. Now, get this. The father had lived in Australia for almost 30 years without ever getting citizenship. According to police, they turned a Hanukkah celebration into a shooting gallery, inspired by the Islamic State. For Abbott, this is the ultimate tragic proof of a complete failure to integrate. Abbott points out this massive, glaring disconnect here. Think about the Australian citizenship oath. New arrivals pledge to share democratic beliefs, respect liberties, and uphold the laws, right? But the actions of these attackers, Abbott argues they completely rejected those national ideals. They completely ignored freedom of religion and entirely disregarded the sanctity of human life. All right, part 3, ideologies versus individuals. Now, Abbott is careful to draw a line between broad religious groups and extreme ideologies. He brings up a fascinating contrast from that exact same day at Bondi. On one hand, you have the gunman who Abbott says represents the worst of Islam. But on the other hand, you have Armored Alarmid, a man who stepped up to protect people in danger because he believes all life is blessed by God. Abbott holds him up as representing the best of Islam. But even while acknowledging those heroic individuals, Abbott pivots to challenge the extreme ideologies themselves. He asks a pretty heavy rhetorical question. How is a commitment to a caliphate or to Sharia law in any way compatible with a liberal, pluralist democracy? He's really questioning if those fundamentalist frameworks can ever actually coexist within a Western democratic system. And just to show this isn't exclusively about religion, he brings in politics too. He asks, how could supporters of a leading role for the Communist Party possibly take the Australian citizenship oath in good conscience? The underlying point? Pledging allegiance to any authoritarian ideology, whether religious or political, just flat out contradicts the freedoms promised in that oath. This brings us to part 4, integration in core culture. Abbott uses this really vivid metaphor to explain his stance on integration. He calls it Team Australia versus Hotel Australia. If you join Team Australia, you're sharing values, pitching in, and making the country stronger together. But Hotel Australia? That's when migrants just use the country as a place to stay, taking advantage of the facilities without actually buying into the social fabric. And if that happens, Abbott warns, the country becomes dangerously fragmented. According to his argument, the whole approach to migration has been flipped upside down. In the past, the expectation was pretty clear. You integrate from day one, you assimilate as quickly as possible, and you're grateful for a better life. But today, under the current doctrine of multiculturalism, Abbott says migrants are actually encouraged to keep their native culture, while Australians are the ones being told that they should be grateful for the diversity.
So what exactly is the culture they should be integrating into? Well, Abbott defines Australia's foundation as being built on an Anglo-Celtic core culture, which he calls the world's most welcoming, and a Judeo-Christian ethos, which he describes as the most universal. And here's the kicker for his argument. He says these exact cultural markers are the very reasons migrants choose to come to Australia in the first place. So his logic is they come to join this society not to fundamentally alter the very core culture that attracted them.
And finally, part 5, the future of migration. Looking ahead, Abbott sets out some pretty strict rules for how cultural change should be handled. First off, he believes the country actually has a duty to keep its character. He admits cultures shouldn't just be frozen in time forever, or, as he puts it, preserved in aspect, but he insists that any change absolutely has to be evolutionary, not revolutionary. It has to be respectful, and it always has to build upon a country's existing strengths rather than eroding them. When you boil it all down, his entire argument rests on this one singular defining goal. He says, we rightly want migration that leaves tomorrow's Australia a recognizable descendant of today's. Essentially, he's saying immigration shouldn't completely transform the nation into something foreign. It's all about preserving a continuous, recognizable national identity generation after generation. So, as we wrap up this explainer, having unpacked the mechanics of Tony Abbott's argument, I want to leave you with a really big question to think about. How exactly does a modern nation balance welcoming newcomers with preserving its historical identity? It is an incredibly delicate balancing act, right? And as Abbott's pretty forceful thesis shows us, how a country chooses to answer that question is going to fundamentally shape its future. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.